We're all qualified to serve on this panel. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Is that a Bernie Sanders-Hillary thing? Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, the baseball season finally arrives, and appropriately enough, there was a bit of snow on opening day, of course. The sale of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel to the Gannett chain gets final approval, but the week was dominated by politics, and that's where we will start. Wisconsin deals a setback to the frontrunners from both parties, handing lopsided defeats to both Democrat Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. On the Democratic side, self-proclaimed socialist Bernie Sanders won the state by 13 points and carried every single county except one, Milwaukee. But he will net just 4 more delegates than Clinton. That's what democracy looks like over there. On the GOP side, a Badger State pummeling for Donald Trump, who had predicted a big win the day before the vote.
I really believe tomorrow we're going to have a very, very big victory. Very, very big.
No. Texas Senator Ted Cruz ran up big margins in southeast Wisconsin and won 36 of the state's 42 delegates. Rather than issuing a concession statement, Trump made no appearances at all election night and issued a statement that lashed out at his opponents. Donald J. Trump, it said, withstood the onslaught of the establishment yet again. Lion Ted Cruz had the governor of Wisconsin, many conservative talk radio show hosts, and the entire party apparatus behind him. Well, he lost the state by 13 points. Ted Cruz told supporters in Milwaukee that Wisconsin was a turning point in the presidential race.
Tonight is a turning point. It is a rallying cry. It is a call from
Voters also gave incumbent State Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley a 10-year term with an unexpectedly decisive win over challenger Joanne Kloppenburg. Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett was easily reelected, and County Executive Chris Abele fended off a challenge from Senator Chris Larson. Now, joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Mikel Holt, former state representative Michelle Litjens, defense attorney Dan Adams, and the managing editor of RightWisconsin.com, Collin Roth. So let's do this in 2 sections. We'll do the presidential primary first, and later the local elections. Who were the biggest winners and losers from last week?
Well, Ted Cruz on the Republican side had a huge win, but I think an even bigger win was for those Stop Trump forces who wanted to deny him the 1237 delegates before the nomination at the convention. I think Wisconsin dealt a huge setback to him. What will happen at the convention? I think Ted Cruz will win the nomination. I don't think there's going to be any white knight coming in from a different party.
Okay, biggest winners and losers. Your guy, Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, well, he's the big winner. I think he's won, 7 primaries in a row, but he hasn't picked up that many delegates.
It won't make a difference because the deck is stacked.
Yeah, but he did pick up a delegate unexpectedly in David Bowen. So, I mean, New York is up next, so I think he'll win that as well. Obviously, the Trumpster was the big loser, and I don't see him getting enough delegates, because the Republican Party was pushing for this contested, process, and that's what they're going to end up.
Okay, biggest winners from the night.
I really think the biggest winner is Scott Walker. And even Paul Ryan. Donald Trump went after them. He attacked Scott Walker on his own home turf, and Scott Walker really seemed to get his mojo back.
Well, he got his mojo back in 2 ways. Number one, he made himself relevant in that presidential race. If this was a referendum between Donald Trump and Scott Walker pretty decisively, and of course, he got a legacy appointment, elected to a 10-year term with Rebecca Bradley. Your biggest winners and losers?
Well, my biggest loser is John Kasich, who came in. This is a state much like his own, same demographic, same industrial state on a Great Lake, and he got decimated. And he had a big name, Tommy Thompson, who I think by proxy is a loser too. He's shown that he doesn't have much clout among Wisconsin conservatives anymore. My winner, regrettably, has to be Bernie Sanders. People like me have been discounting him for a long time, but he had a decisive win.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the biggest loser is Donald Trump, who really hit a speed bump here, and I do think it makes it much less likely that he'll get to 1237 to an open convention. But you have to just take a step back, though, and realize, some of the big winners here. State Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley. You commented a couple of weeks ago that she had, I think you said, the worst week of anyone in politics since Tom Amon, and that was true. They threw everything they had at her. I'm trying to remember the last time a statewide candidate had this kind of a concerted attack from the left, from the oppo groups like One Wisconsin Now, from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel news section. They endorsed Joanne Kloppenburg. And she not only was able to pick herself off the mat, but she was able to win by about more than 90,000 votes. That is impressive.
Probably on the wings of the big primary turnout from Waukesha County and Ozaukee and Washington. But, you know, to her credit, she didn't lay down when times got tough.
Okay, were you surprised at Tom Barrett's margin, Mikel Holt? 70% of the vote.
No, not really. Well, actually, I thought Donovan would get a little bit more of a push, but it was a perfect candidate for Tom Barrett because not only did they deal with Donovan's temperament, but they implied he was racist. So, I mean, that kind of like swung everything in Tom Barrett's favor.
Okay, any other big winners or losers come to mind for you?
Well, big losers, I mean, you mentioned it, but Donald Trump. But I also think the left, One Wisconsin Now, and all of the groups that decided to dig up all of that information that happened 20 years ago on Rebecca Bradley, and the newspaper for printing it and not printing a retraction, I think that the Journal-Sentinel was a big loser.
I do think that, and I've said this on the radio, there was a real discernible turning point in that election. If you've ever seen a backlash, I do think the left actually thought that she was done in the middle of that 1 week. By Friday, when she picked herself up and she fought back, you could just sense the fact that people were pushing back. I also think, just sort of on a larger basis, the conservative movement in Wisconsin, which has had some downtimes, there have been some disappointments, maybe a little bit of complacency. I felt that they sort of got the band back together again. And I think that when you look at these numbers, the fact that more than 100,000 more people voted in the Republican primary than in the Democratic primary, you had these massive turnouts here in southeastern Wisconsin, the vote for Rebecca Bradley, you basically had the Walker coalition from the recalls show up again.
Yeah, absolutely. That number that she hit was about 52%, which ought to be really familiar to a lot of Republicans.
Okay, what has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Mikel Holt, you are first.
Well, my glass is half full because the black vote was a determining factor in several key elections, including the race for county executive. It's half empty because Congressman Grant Grothman admitted the voter ID legislation's purpose was to hinder the black vote.
He did not.
It didn't work, but thousands of people were inconvenienced, waiting in lines for hours.
Michelle Litjens.
My glass is half full because Milwaukee police were able to track down a criminal using his cell phone location with a Stingray. But it's half empty because our government is able to track us down using our cell phones.
Dan Adams.
My glass is half full because Outagamie County Executive Thomas Nelson is running for Congress. The seat is open due to Reed Ribble's retirement. Nelson is a first-tier Democratic candidate and is well-placed to flip that seat. My glass is half empty because another good elected official, Alderman Mike Murphy, is fighting hard to stave off a real challenge to Milwaukee's Common Council presidency. Murphy is a real good guy, a good leader, and should keep his position.
Collin Roth.
My glass is half full because baseball is back and the days are getting longer. It's half empty because how many more April days are going to feature snow flurries?
Well, first of all, Congressman Grothman did not say what Michael said. In fact, you would think this election with the record turnout was the vindication for voter ID. There was no suppression. Well, my glass is half full because Wisconsin was, in fact, a firewall of rationality in the presidential election. Congratulations. It's half empty because it has taken so long for the media to do its job and for voters in the rest of the country to realize that Donald Trump is a fraud. Our Sunday Insight Countdown shows that we are 9 days away from the New York primary. 291 Democratic Party delegates are at stake. 95 Republican delegates are on the line. The Northeast primaries in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island are 16 days away. That's when 463 Democratic Party delegates and 95 Republican delegates are selected. The Republican National Convention begins in just 99 days. The Democratic National Convention starts in 106 days, and we will be right back. In a year that has featured voter anger against the status quo, it was a good night for incumbents around here. Justice Rebecca Bradley cruised to victory. And incumbent Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett and Milwaukee County Executive Chris Abele both won 4-year terms. Voters across the state were also in a generous mood, approving hundreds of millions of dollars in school referendums. So we'll start with you, Dan Adams. Who are the biggest winners and losers in the local state elections?
Well, the biggest loser by far is Bob Donovan. I mean, you remember the end of the first Star Wars movie where the Death Star blows up? And that was Bob Donovan's campaign very early on. I mean, you can't get 70% of people to agree that Elvis is dead, but Tom Barrett was able to get 70% in this election.
Okay, how did that happen?
Right.
Yeah, and Bob Donovan was a poor candidate. He invested badly in his campaign, and he got defined by Tom Barrett very easily and wasn't able to mobilize any galvanizing message that would have been anti-incumbency.
Okay, biggest winners and losers.
Well, my biggest winner, I guess, would be Chris Abele. And then the biggest loser would be the man who wants to be king, who wants to be the head of the empire, Chris Larson, who was soundly defeated, in part because Abele changed his message soon enough to pull in some of the moderates.
Let's get our heads around this for a moment. Chris Abele spent $4 million in the race for Milwaukee County Executive. I mean, $4 million? Really?
I'd say it was a good investment at this point. I mean, now
if you have the money to spend.
Yeah. If he's county executive for 400 years, he'll make the money back. I mean,
well, but he's not in it for the money. Obviously, he has other ideas about what his role is. He's been a philanthropist.
Is he going to run for governor?
No, he's not. I can guarantee that.
Okay, you can guarantee that. Yeah.
I would have to go back to the biggest loser is Chris Larson.
Yeah.
Also, the city of Milwaukee brought back a mayor who doesn't seem to give a rip about his constituents at all. All he wants to do is build it. Damn trolley.
Well, okay, this is the thing. The trolley issue alone, I think, was a 70-30 loser for Barrett. That was an issue that could have galvanized support. I'm not sure how what public opinion in the neighborhoods would have been about spending all the money on the Bucks Arena. Crime, legitimate problem. Poverty, legitimate problem. All of these issues. And the incumbent mayor just cruises through. I mean, you want to talk about a fail. I want to go back to the biggest loser in the statewide. I mean, you know, the left has got to be very, very frustrated. This is the second consecutive election which Joanne Kloppenberg ran. I think that left-wing organizations were absolutely sure they were going to take out Rebecca Bradley. They made, of course, the mistake of just simply assuming that if they kept saying that she was tied to Scott Walker, that somehow that was going to flip the court.
But they should have learned that. They tried that against Justice Prosser a few years ago, right? The left cannot win just by attacking a candidate. They need someone that we can, their voters can get excited and rally around. You could not vote for Joanne Kloppenberg because of her record.
I completely agree. Yeah. I think the Democratic Party and the left need to come up with a post-Act 10 message. They are stuck in 2011. It's getting bored. Voters don't trust it. They don't want to just have anti-people.
Okay, now you may not want to hear about it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're
Okay, hold on to your seats. Okay. Mine is to Charlie the Pimp.
Okay.
Charlie, I don't know how much you paid Reverend James Manning to call you a paid Benedict Arnold for pimp slapping Donald Trump. But it wasn't enough. He made you a national figure now.
It was okay. Michelle Litjens.
You got to watch that video, everybody, if you haven't seen it. Now, to Hillary Clinton, have someone teach you how to properly pour beer before your next media event at a bar. Otherwise, we're going to question if you ever went to college.
Dan Adams.
Milwaukee is seeing a massive spike in drug overdose deaths because dealers are selling fentanyl, a crazy strong narcotic, to heroin users. So my advice is, well, don't do drugs, now more than ever.
Collin Roth.
And my unsolicited advice is for the Republican National Committee, figure out a way to clone those great Waukesha County voters.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually borrowing this from progressive activist Michael McCabe, who wrote an open letter asking his fellow liberals last week, how many more elections will it take for you to figure out that you cannot beat Wisconsin's governor by hating him? Next on Sunday Insight, was Wisconsin a turning point in the election or just a bump in the road for the leading candidates? A big night for Scott Walker, who saw his endorsed candidates win big in the Republican presidential primary and his appointee to the state Supreme Court win a full term. But the presidential campaign barely paused before moving on to New York, which is a much friendlier terrain for frontrunner Donald Trump. So the question here is, was Wisconsin's vote a turning point, or will it just be a blip? Michelle Litjens.
You know, not only was it a turning point, I think it was so important what happened here, and we have to give you and a number of other talk show hosts credit for this. No one previously has asked Donald Trump the tough questions.
Which is kind of amazing.
It's actually, so many of us have wondered why, Rush Limbaugh and Hannity and everybody else has just been following him. you've inspired people across the country now, not only to stand up and ask Donald Trump the tough questions, but because of some of the other media stuff that you've gotten out of this, I think other local talk show hosts are going to say, I want a piece of that. I'm going to do the same thing.
Our 15 minutes of fame is over, and I'm completely okay with this. But maybe we will shame some of the other reporters into, hey, you know what? You can actually ask him questions, you can press him, and maybe you will make some news. Your sense on both the Democrat and the Republican side, does it change the narrative, or is it going to all flip back in New York?
It all flips back. I mean, New York is Hillary Clinton's kind of home state. Yeah. She was senator there. Pennsylvania, California, big delegate counts there. She's ahead in all the polls. On the Republican side, you guys haven't answered the question, what happens if Trump comes in with a vast plurality of votes? How do you deny him the nomination when the second most delegate count?
Can I answer the question?
Well, it's rhetorical.
Okay, no, it's not a rhetorical question. It's because a plurality is not a majority. If he does not get 1237, he is not entitled to win that. And
but doesn't he have the moral ground if he comes in with
it's mathematics, and the majority does get to rule. What will happen is there will be a vote. If he fails to win on the first ballot, he will not get this nomination, and that's why I do think this is a turning point, because this vote makes it much less likely for him to get in. And trust me, Republicans are not going to have any qualms about denying a nomination to a man who this week we found out has a 70% disapproval rate. But I also think that it was a turning point because there was a change in the narrative. I sense a change in the mood of coverage and looking at some of the national polls.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the change in how show hosts and media personalities are handling Donald Trump, I think, changed. I also think, we have to acknowledge, too, that the conventional wisdom, these narratives, they change so fast. So I think Donald Trump could be a winner in another week, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay, your sense?
Well, for Hillary, it was just a bump. She's eventually going to get the nomination. But
it got nasty. I mean,
the racists turned nasty to talk about credentials now, etc. And now there's this controversy about Bill Clinton with Black Lives Matter in Philadelphia. Now that could potentially backfire and hurt Hillary. I would not be surprised though if Bernie did win New York, because you get this large population of independents who are just as frustrated.
If Bernie Sanders wins in New York, then I think all bets are off. Although, I mean, let's be honest about it, he's kind of it's a little eccentric, shall we say? I do think that we're going to look back on this Republican primary as a big turning point. As I said before, we have now the model how you stop Donald Trump, and I think people are starting to realize that there's no there when it comes to substance, there's no there when it comes to the campaign organization, and all of that is going to play out in the coming states. What is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
What I don't get is how 3 first-grade girls in an Alaskan public school who plotted to kill another student were suspended for 3 days. If they were black, they would have been given the electric chair.
Michelle Litjens.
Charlie, I don't get how far left the Democratic Party has moved if their voters are challenging President Bill Clinton on his welfare reform from the 1990s.
Dan Adams.
Bernie Sanders supporters, you say you want a revolution. Well, we all want to change the world, but 85,000 of you didn't vote in the state Supreme Court race? I don't get it.
Yeah, cry me a river. Collin Roth.
What I don't get is why Donald Trump raised the stakes in Wisconsin ahead of the primary and predicted a win despite the polls. A dumb move among many.
Well, Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, has one of the worst racial achievement gaps and unemployment gaps in the country. It has rising violent crime, blighted neighborhoods, massive deferred maintenance costs, and a genuine low-income housing crisis. So what I don't get is why voters in Milwaukee were so content this week with the status quo. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It is time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
Loser, Trump. He got his behind handed to him by Wisconsin voters. Winner, I saw a social media post of Bernie Sanders using duct tape to hold up his campaign signs 9 months ago. Today, his status, including beating Hillary by 100,000 votes in Wisconsin, dictates high tech and greater scrutiny.
Michelle Litjens.
Well, the winner is Wisconsin. We were in the national spotlights the 2 weeks leading up to the presidential primary. The nation got a good dose of Wisconsin nice, which only will help folks visit Wisconsin this summer. The losers are the high schoolers in Kenosha. A transgender girl, now boy, was allowed to run for prom king. If they don't vote for him or her, the kids will be labeled discriminatory. And if they vote her as king, whoever is voted queen has to dance with the king. Those kids lose either way.
This is confusing. Dan Adams.
My winner, Citizens of Milwaukee, the Couture project, a huge $122 million development, has received federal approval, and demolition of the ugly downtown transit center will begin after Summerfest. This is an awesome development that will remake our city. My losers are the streetcar opponents, good or bad. With Mayor Barrett's re-election and the majority of the Common Council on board, it looks like the train has left the station.
Collin Roth.
My winner this week is the Marquette University Law Poll. Once again, Charles Franklin and crew proved to know Wisconsin best. They previewed Cruz's double-digit win, Bernie's victory, and Rebecca Bradley's 4.5-point win. Nice work. My losers are all the Wisconsinites who got their 5 minutes of cable news fame this past week. The circus has moved on. Hope you enjoyed it.
Well, my winner is Marquette professor John McAdams, who last week rejected demands that he apologize for committing a flagrant act of free speech. Loser, Marquette University, which continues to try to punish McAdams for that speech and now finds itself at ground zero in the fight over ideological intolerance and academic freedom. It won't end well. Thanks for joining us and joining me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.